Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Sudaso, and I'm here with Tan Wade to my left. This evening we'll be talking a little bit about Samsara, so one of the central concepts in Buddhist thought, which is important to understand if we want to understand what Buddhism is all about. Before we start, we'll begin by paying homage to the Buddha, and then we'll share some words of Dhamma and then take any questions that you might have. So feel free to type in questions at any time. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So first off, I think it's useful to say a little bit about the meaning of this word samsara. So understanding the etymology of this word can be useful. So it comes from the verb sarati, which means to run or to flow. And the prefix sang. So the prefix sang normally has the sense of complete or together, but it also can have the meaning of around or all around. So then one literal translation of samsara would mean running around, like running in circles, which I find quite cute. So samsara means running in circles. It's true. It's not. It's actually horrifically painful, but it's cute. So samsara. What is samsara? Briefly speaking, samsara is the experience of reality that we have through a delusional mind. So samsara is the world of suffering. It's the world of disappointment, of grief, of despair, of confusion, of sadness, of not getting what we want and getting what we don't want. It's this experience of constantly coming into unsatisfying experiences, unsatisfying states of existence. And therefore it's also by necessity, it's the process of birth and death, and birth and death, and birth and death. So the cycle of continuously renewing existence, constantly coming into some kind of narrow, limited, and painful, or if not painful, at least unsatisfying and confusing experience. So samsara then is running around in these cycles of uncomfortable and confusing experiences. Does it sound familiar to anyone? Does it sound like a pretty accurate description of life? I see some nodding. Yeah, okay. So briefly speaking, that's what we mean when we talk about samsara. So then Buddhist practice is the practice of becoming free from samsara. So it's recognizing that samsara is fundamentally the experience of a delusional mind. It's the experience of an unawakened mind, of a mind that's still afflicted with desire and aversion, of a mind that doesn't understand the nature of reality, of a mind which is still self-centered, self-obsessed. So then Buddhist practice is, it's about cultivating wisdom, compassion, and self-restraint so that we can break free of samsara, so we can break free of these painful cycles of confusing and unpleasant states of self-centered existence. So that's a very brief summary of the concept of samsara. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Tan Wade to the conversation and invite him to share a few words on the topic of samsara and the way out of samsara, whatever comes to your mind on this topic.
Thank you, Bhante. Well, Bhante has presented it so well. I was trying to think if there's something I have to say that could dovetail or expand on it a little bit. Um, one of the key elements of samsara we find described in the First Noble Truth from the Buddha's first sermon, the Dhammacakkappavattana, and he says there's suffering, and he says that the five khandhas associated with attachment are all suffering, they're all burdensome. And he goes on to say that the cause of suffering in the Second Noble Truth is tanha, usually translated these days in English as craving. And he says specifically it's the craving for sensual pleasures, the craving for becoming, and the craving for non-becoming. The Theravada tradition tells us that what is meant by becoming is action and its consequences. So the desire to take action and to experience the consequences of actions. Or the opposite, the desire to not take action and not experience the consequences. And then the first one again, the desire for sensual pleasures. And so having these kinds of desires, these cravings in the heart seeks a body, and it makes a body, partly through karma. And making a body and taking birth, it then has to experience old age, disease, and death again, still with these three forms of craving inside, causing it to once again desire a body, to make a body. And then this is the going around and around and around, which necessarily involves suffering. The Buddha said that there is gratification in things like sensual pleasures, and there's gratification in becoming also. We all experience these sorts of things. For example, if we accomplish something in life, we graduate from school, for example, or we get the job we want, or we have a child, we give birth to a child, for example, we experience some gratification. If we have the good fortune to have some sensual pleasure, for example, a delicious meal, or we get to listen to some music that we really like, these kinds of things, there is some gratification. But the Buddha said that there's also a danger with all these kinds of things. And the danger is that these are all ephemeral. And so experiencing these kinds of pleasures with attachment, then when they change, we necessarily experience suffering. And so this is the cycle we go through in samsara, with desires for sensual pleasures and for becoming and for non-becoming, experiencing some satisfaction, some gratification, and then watching it fade, and then having to once again try to find another sensual pleasure or another pleasure of becoming, or trying to escape the cycle of actions and consequences. And then when we experience old age, disease, and death, restarting the cycle over again in the next life with another body.
Yeah, so this is then it's centering around this critical concept of how the mind keeps generating new experiences for itself. And the mind keeps generating new experiences for itself because the mind is constantly seeking. It's constantly seeking some kind of satisfying experience. And it's constantly seeking some kind of limited, self-centered experience. So I getting what I want. And this is what generates this constant experience of discontent, is that we're always seeking happiness in conditional phenomena. We're always seeking happiness in things that are inherently limited and unsatisfying. And they're inherently limited and unsatisfying precisely because they are conditional and therefore temporary and unreliable. So then this is why then the path to freedom from samsara, therefore the path to freedom from suffering, or in positive terms, the path to complete freedom and happiness, is through the relinquishment of desire, and also, most importantly, the relinquishment of self-centeredness. So this then is the essence of Buddhist practice. It's the cultivation of contentment as a way of abandoning desire, and compassion as a way of abandoning self-centeredness. And also then the necessity of cultivating wisdom, the wisdom which clearly recognizes all things as impermanent and impersonal. Because when we see things as impermanent, then we recognize that there's no point in trying to hold on to anything. because it's insubstantial. It doesn't last. It's ephemeral. There's nothing we can hold on to, even if we want to. Actually, in a few places in the sutras, the Buddha even directly says that nothing whatsoever can be held on to. So the whole process of clinging is the function of a delusion mind, because it's trying to do something which is inherently impossible, namely hold on to something. Nothing can be held on to for even a moment, let alone longer than that. And recognizing that everything is impersonal, so that we stop taking everything personally. So normally we take everything personally. We think, whether we recognize it or not, literally every single unenlightened person is extremely self-centered. Even if they're on the relatively nice and kind and generous side, they're still fundamentally self-centered. And this is because we're constantly framing our stories of life in terms of me. Like, I got up this morning and I had some coffee, and then I went to the food bank so I could do some charity work, so I could help some other people. Like, yeah, it's good stuff, but it's all the story of me. So it's all fundamentally self-centered. It's completely fixated on this concept of me as being separate from those others. So then the practice of cultivating compassion is it's deeper than just doing nice things for other people. It's also recognizing that others are not different from ourselves, and others are not separate from ourselves. And even everything which we call me is ultimately impersonal. Everything that we call me is just a product of nature. It's just a natural expression of the cause and effect cycle of nature. So it's not something which is ultimately me or mine, but it's just a temporary experience that comes and goes within the grand scheme of reality. Do you have any more thoughts on this? Or should we start looking at the questions and see where the questions take us?
Sure. Yeah, right. Why don't we? Yeah.
Great. So I see there's a few questions which have been typed in online already. So hello, first off, to our people joining in online. So hello to Seema, Manal, Jake, Mary, Jeff, Kumu, John, Tayanu, Lisa, Karuna, Bhumika, and Amaranta. Welcome. Good to see all of you. And we have a question here. Jeff says, I've heard Samsara used of the destruction and recreation of the universe. Is that a Buddhist concept? Well, one of the aspects of how the Buddha described reality is he speaks about cycles of the universe expanding and contracting. So, and in between, then there's periods of time where there's actually no physical universe at all. So then there's, we can talk about the creation and destruction of the universe, but it's more like something comes into being and lasts for a while changing, and then ceases to be. And this is one of the basic overall principles of Buddhism, is that everything arises and ceases. Everything that comes into being also ceases to exist. And the same applies to everything from very small things all the way up to very large things like entire universes. So the Buddha talks about how at some point in the distant past, this universe came into being. And at some point in the future, this universe will cease to exist. And then it's going to happen all over again. So another universe will come into being and last for a while, and then that one will also cease to exist. And the Buddha said in some places in the suttas, he said that he could remember this happening thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And actually, he said there's no beginning point that you could find. No matter how far back you looked, you would just see this endless cycle of universes appearing, lasting for a while, and then disappearing. So Big Bang, Big Crunch, Big Bang, Big Crunch. Or well, these days they're talking about the heat death of the universe, which I don't quite understand. I prefer the Big Crunch model. But that's beside the point. The point being is, one way or another, universes come to an end. And after a universe comes to an end, then another one appears. And there's also a number of places in the sutras where the Buddha seems to be talking about other concurrently existing world systems, and he might be talking about parallel universes, which are also going through their own cycles of appearing and disappearing concurrently to this one. So the Buddha talks in extremely large scales. And of course, all of this is within the scope of samsara. So samsara includes these vast scales of time and space with entire universes appearing and disappearing. And samsara also includes very small minor things, like when you go to lunch and the person before you took all the brownies and you're just like, what the hell is wrong with this world? Like, that's also samsara. So it's everything from the very tiny to the very large. It's all within the scope of samsara. Yeah.
I think one thing that I find interesting, I don't know if anyone else would, is that if I recall correctly, according to the suttas, at a time when the universe is being destroyed, that actually all living beings are reborn in a very high heaven realm. Is this?
And in a very low hell realm.
And in a very low hell realm. Oh, I didn't remember that. Sorry. This kind of so you got to be careful. One of the things that struck me about it is that living beings, it seems, according to the scriptural references, are actually of themselves, they're actually indestructible. That they may have to go down into terrible suffering for a while, and then sometimes they go up through the human realm, sometimes they go up to the heavenly realms. But that while the rest of the universe can be destroyed from time to time, the living beings themselves don't get destroyed, although they have to cycle around. Is that accurate?
Well, this gets into a dangerous way of talking. So the word indestructible immediately puts me on edge.
Okay.
More, I would say that the momentum created by a person's actions inevitably kindle a corresponding result. That's how I would probably phrase things, rather than saying beings are indestructible.
Okay.
Yeah, if we say beings are indestructible, that wanders dangerously close to the view of eternalism, the belief that beings live forever, which is not a Buddhist concept. But indestructible, I mean, there's a way of talking about this where, again, like in physics, they say that energy is never created or destroyed, it's only transformed.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in a similar way, we can say every karma has a corresponding vipaka. Mm-hmm. So every action has a corresponding result. So for example, if somebody has lived a life as an unawakened being, which is most people, then they've created a lot of karma, which is that energetic potential, which needs to create a corresponding result. But if that happens to be at a time where there's no physical universe available, then their karma would still express itself, but it would only express itself in whatever realms of existence were actually available at the time. So whether that would be in one of the heaven realms or one of the hell realms would depend upon the person's particular karma. Where I get a little bit uncomfortable with this particular view, though, is that it does seem to raise the question then, well, what about other world systems? What about other universes? Like, if this one doesn't have any physicality, what about another one that currently does? If somebody had the karma to be reborn in a physical form, wouldn't they just appear in another universe where there was physicality available? But it gets into a bit of speculation when we get to that point. But yeah, I would shy away from the word indestructible. Yeah, it gets dangerous. So Jeff asks, is the birth-death cycle similar in concept to ancient Greek of metempsychosis? Do you have any idea what this is talking about?
Metempsychosis, yeah, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, neither do I. Anybody know what this metempsychosis, ancient Greek? No? Okay, nobody else here. Sorry, Jeff.
If we can ask for it.
What's this?
It's similar. It's the idea. It's the exact same.
Oh.
It's the idea that there's rebirths, and we need to find a way out of it.
Okay. So that was in ancient Greek philosophy.
Yeah, the Pythagoreans, for instance. It's like it's a samsara and moksha.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay. So according to Samsara, yes, it is similar to metempsychosis. Amaranta says, I have heard that samsara and nirvana are in fact produced by the mind. I don't understand this. Would you please talk about it? Would you please talk about it?
Well, so I don't know if there's a scriptural reference to something like this, except from the if there's an idea about the formations of physical matter coming from formations being formed by karma, for example, perhaps, which I think is a concept we find more prominently in the commentaries, although I'm not well read in them by any means. So this is actually kind of how if I understand correctly, how the Kru Bhajans of Thailand teach that actually our karma is expressed by the jitta forming formations and based on the karmic results of our actions. So maybe that's what I can say. Nirvana produced by the mind. This, I think, is not a Theravadan idea. That I think the Theravadan idea is that Nibbana is its own unconditioned reality that is not dependent on creation by someone's mind. And it's actually kind of a key point that it is unconditioned, it's not made. And so therefore it does not die, it doesn't end. Because that which arises dependent on conditions is all subject to ceasing, is one of the fundamental statements from Buddhist philosophy. So, yeah.
Yes, the same in Mahayana. Also in Mahayana, there's the same idea that nirvana is unconditioned and therefore cannot be produced. But the idea that everything in samsara is produced by the mind, I think that definitely is a fundamental Buddhist concept. Actually, one of the clearest statements of this is in the first line of the Dhammapada. Mano Bhubangama Dhamma Mano Seta Mano Maya. The Buddha says, all things are preceded by the mind, bested by the mind, and created by the mind. So there's actually a very clear statement where the Buddha states that, yeah, actually everything is a creation of the mind, which is why training the mind is the most important thing, because literally everything else is mental objects, it's mental phenomena. You have a question? You have a comment? What's up?
I think it relates to this, you can tell me. Briefly, it says, because there are these three causes: the origination of karma, greed is a cause, the origination of hatred is a cause, illusion is a cause. It is not the realms of devas or humans or any other predestination as seen because of karma originating in greed, hatred, and delusion. Rather, it is hell, the animal realm, the sphere of religious spirits, or any other bad destination as seen because of karma originating in greed, hatred. And it flips the other side. It's not hell that is seen because of non-hatred, not greed. It's the realm of devas and humans.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Yeah. So as far as samsara and nirvana, again, saying samsara is produced by the mind, there's a way that you can say that, but there's also another way where you could speak where you can say that reality just is what it is, and it's more that we see certain aspects of it depending upon the current configuration of mind, which is a bit closer to the Sarvastivada viewpoint. And I know the Sarvastivada gets ragged on by literally every single surviving Buddhist school, but they did have some really good ideas, some really interesting ways of viewing Dhamma. So, and one of their ideas was that it's not that we produce anything per se, but rather that everything is already here. And it's more that we're seeing one particular piece of samsara depending upon how the mind is currently conditioned. So that's another way of understanding this. So it's not necessarily that we're creating samsara with our mind, but rather that depending upon what our current configuration of defilements and delusions is, then we'll see some particular piece or section of samsara. So that can also be another way of talking about this. And ultimately, we're always using ways of speaking which are incomplete or not quite precise. We're always trying to speak about something which is not really expressible in words. So from one way of talking about it, we can say that we create samsara in our mind. Another way of talking about it is that we're viewing samsara depending upon the particular limitations or conditions of mind. And both ways of speaking are just ways of speaking, but they're ways of understanding what we're talking about. And also understanding that ultimately the problem is the defilements and delusions of mind, which are preventing us from seeing nibbana, from seeing absolute reality, from seeing the unconditioned. And you can just see some little conditioned black ears peeking up at the bottom of the screen. This is the cat Teddy. And Seema says, I was under the impression that becoming means wanting to be born again. Could you please explain what exactly becoming and non-becoming means? So she's asking about bhava tanha and vibhava tanha. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, we have these terms in the Pali Suttas. Bhava meaning becoming. Sometimes it's translated as existence, and it's the only definitions I've seen in the Pali Suttas. I wonder if Bhante's seen some others that would be relevant. Is, for example, in the description of the explanation of Paticca Samuppada, where it says that there are it refers to bhava as being multiple types based on where you're reborn. And so the commentaries, as I understand it, they expand on it and trying to explain what bhava is, and they say that bhava is about taking action and experiencing the consequences of actions. And so non-becoming would be not taking action, not experiencing the consequences. And so living beings would make choices, inform intentions to either take an action to experience a result, or to not take an action because of not wanting to experience a result. So that's if I understand correctly, that's what we usually talk about it as becoming in Theravadan Buddhism, based on this commentarial definition.
Yeah, another way, I think that's accurate. Another way of understanding it is that bhava tanha, so the craving for becoming or the craving for being or existence, is wanting to have a particular kind of experience. So I want to be Australian, or I want to be a teacher, or I want to be a cat, or I want to be respected, or I want to be liked, or I want to be whatever. So it doesn't really matter what you fill in the blank with. It's I want to be such and such. That's bhava tanha, the craving for being, craving for becoming. And it can also just be more generalized, like I want to be, I want to exist as some kind of self-aware individual. I want to have some kind of existence. Any kind is fine. So there's also generalized bhava tanha, that's just the general desire for personal existence. Then the opposite of this, vibhava tanha. So the prefix vi here means to separate from. So vibhava tanha is the craving to separate from states of existence. And again, this can be specific, in specifically like, I want to not be Australian, or I want to not be a teacher, or I want to not be, well, nobody actually wants to not be liked or respected, but I want to not be something in particular. I want to avoid a particular state of being. Or just more generally, I want to avoid existing altogether. So the craving to just cease to exist altogether. I want to just blink out of existence. And it's interesting, by the way, the fact that the Buddha identified the desire for non-existence as being an aspect of delusion, and part of the fuel that keeps us spinning through the cycles of samsara, of birth and death, also clearly points to the fact that non-existence is not the goal of Buddhist practice. So sometimes when people start to study Buddhist philosophy, and they start to understand what the Buddha is talking about to a certain degree, then sometimes they form the idea that the goal of Buddhism is to cease existing. But that's actually not correct. That's not what the Buddha was teaching. And in fact, he identifies the desire for non-existence as being a delusional activity of mind, which actually contributes to the underlying problem of cycling through painful states of being. So just putting that out there as a reminder, we're actually not trying to cease existing, but rather we're trying to let go of both the desire to exist and the desire to not exist, both in the specific form and the general form. Go ahead.
I wonder if I may add just a little tidbit. I wonder if this might be of interest to her. Can't see her name, unfortunately. But the mentioning in regard to wanting to be born again, that if I understand correctly, this kind of desire for becoming, it kind of necessarily expresses itself in wanting to have a body, kind of thing. As I was saying before. So the desire to experience sensual pleasures means that we necessarily want to have we want to have the senses, we want to have eyes and ears and nose and so on like this. The desire to, for example, engage in romance necessarily requires that we would have a body. And so this requires birth, as we know it. And the desire to kind of achieve things like to win or succeed in life in various ways, whether it's beating someone up or gaining becoming a singing star, or the entire wide range of possibilities. These all require some kind of a form to express itself in. And so this is a direct correlation to rebirth as a result of becoming. Okay.
Great, thank you. Yeah. And Teyanu says, is there anything behind the universe, like a plan? No, just a lot of confusion. So this universe is basically it's just the experience of confusion. It's countless billions of confused beings manifesting their delusions. That's basically what the universe is. So it's fundamentally, it's not a particularly happy place. It has its nice points, but it also has some rather unpleasant sides as well. But the overall characteristic of reality and of samsara, the overall characteristic of samsara is confusion. That's its basic trait. So reality itself follows very clearly defined laws of cause and effect. But the experience of sentient beings is marked by confusion, which is why Buddhism is ultimately the path of wisdom. It's trying to cut through that confusion and start to see reality as it is, and understand that reality actually is operating according to clearly defined causal principles. It's just that it's hard for us to see because we're confused and delusional. Okay, so Santa Celeste Moya says, my question deals with the law of karma. Does the Buddha believe that we create good or bad karma during the time we are alive? For example, everything we put out there comes back to us. Ton Wade?
Yes. Does the Buddha believe that we create good or bad karma during the time we are alive? Yes. This is an important part of the teaching on karma, according to Buddhism, that if we have in the mind delusion, aversion, or greed, the kind of the three basic, the roots of unskillful action, as they're actually formally known in the tradition, these negative mental states, then we're likely, if we follow along with them, if we do what they tell us to do, then if we take action, it's quite likely to be bad for us in the long run. What they call bad karma, and as a result of bad karma, we have to experience the negative results. We have to experience suffering. If we act on skillful mental states, such as non-delusion, non-greed, and non-aversion, which are all these categories, of course, are very broad. But if we act upon skillful mental states, then our actions are likely to be skillfully likely to be good karma, resulting in pleasant experience as a result. And so the Buddha, as part of this explanation, you see he not only did he talk about good and bad karma as the actions, but also he said it's important to look behind the actions to the mental states that we have, because that's really where everything starts.
Great, thank you. And Jake says, was samsara a novel concept that was first explained by the Buddha, or did it have earlier roots? Well, actually, in the room, we have an expert on the pre-Buddhist ancient Indian philosophies. So, Samara Vadda. Was samsara a pre-Buddhist concept that the Buddha took over and made his own?
Yes and no. I mean, he did it. It's not exactly the same, but he wasn't the first to think that there was a cycle of birth and death that we have to escape from. Yeah.
Okay.
But it was usually thought of as a soul cycling through that needed to exist eternally outside of it.
Yeah, so Samanarvada states that yes, the concept of samsara did exist prior to the Buddha. The critical difference was it was usually linked to the concept of a eternal soul. Whereas the Buddha presented the idea of cycles of birth and rebirth without the idea of a eternal soul being involved. And Jeff says, how does the born again within the current lifetime concept taught by some Christian groups correlate to samsara cycling of birth, death, and rebirth? Are they conceptually the same? I don't think so. I think these are very different concepts.
Okay, I'm reading through it. I'm not, and I have to say, I'm not familiar with. I'm not sure I know exactly what the concept is from the Christian point of view that they're specifically referring to.
I do know.
Okay.
So it refers to the idea of someone who either they were not Christian or they were practicing Christian very loosely and lax, like in a lackadaisical way. And then at some point they decide that they want to really commit hardcore to being a full-on fundamentalist. So that's when they become a born-again Christian. The idea that
right.
you're now starting a new life
as
a really serious, devout Christian, as opposed to your previous, all your years up until then was your previous life. So actually I hear actually a number of Buddhists talk in this way. Actually, sometimes in monastic circles, we talk about being born on our ordination day. Which is usually a number much smaller than our physical age. Actually, always, because you can't ordain somebody the moment they're born. So that's actually being born again. So I was born again when I was ordained. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I was thinking also about what do you think of also the noble birth?
Yes, actually, this is another thing the Buddha talks about. Is he talks about the moment when one reaches the first stage of awakening. He calls that, it's actually the term that he uses. Noble birth he uses to refer to monastic life, as I recall.
Oh, okay.
But he also talks about attaining awakening as being, again, one of these transformative experiences, which is a bit like being born again, but I actually don't remember the term he uses.
I remember in I don't think it's specifically right, but I remember he says since you've been born. But I don't think he says, I don't know the term.
I think in the Angulimala Sutta he's talking about ordination, and there he does say noble birth. He says Arya Jata, noble birth, but I'm pretty sure he's talking about ordination. But he could be talking about awakening, now that I think about it. Because Angulimala attained awakening and got ordination at basically the same time. Lucky guy. Okay.
Sadhu.
Let's see. Tiano says, is Buddhism atheistic? Well, it all depends on what you mean by atheism, and it depends on what you mean by theism. So Buddhism talks about a wide range of celestial beings, which you could call them angels or demigods or divinities or gods or whatever. You can call them whatever you want, really. Much of them line up pretty closely with the polytheistic religions that have existed at various points throughout human history, including Hinduism, as well as the Roman pantheon, the Norse pantheon, all these different polytheistic systems. What is defining characteristic of the Buddhist concept of deities, though, is that The Buddhist perspective is that all of them are mortal. So that the Buddha stated that no being whatsoever is immortal and no being whatsoever is omnipotent. So every single sentient being, even the highest gods, are eventually going to die. And all of them have limits on their power. Nobody has unlimited power. And interestingly enough, not even a Buddha can properly be called immortal or omnipotent. So Buddhas are also not deities.
Yeah, it's an interesting case of going to Nibbana, that one, because it's something that he says in the sutras. It's you can't fathom, actually, the Tathagata after he's gone to Nibbana. And so so he's kind of uncategorizable.
Uncategorizable?
Exactly. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, well, when we start talking about awakened beings after death, then we get into this grand domain of speculation, which the Buddha actually specifically told us not to speculate on. Yeah, good times. Nonetheless, we still talk about it every now and then. So, Karna says, if we can't fully understand the difference between the unskillful desire for non-becoming and the skillful goal of letting go of the desire for both becoming and non-becoming, welcome to Buddhism. What's the best way to move closer to clarity on this difference? Is it something better understood experientially through practice? Ton Wade.
I would say yes, that you've answered your question there, that it's better experienced experientially through practice. They say that you have to go into samadhi and really see these processes playing out in your mind, and see this urge to either take action or to avoid taking action, and not form an intention for either. So it's actually through the non-formation of intention that this comes about, that you go beyond either one. And this is something, it's kind of beyond our normal rational mind to really think about. I mean, what would that be like or something? But you have to kind of be there and do it and experience it to understand it, and to make it happen. I think.
Yeah, I would also remind you that both of these forms of desire are based upon the sense of I, of me. So I want to exist. I want to cease existing. They're both starting with I want. So the sense of self and the sense of desire. So one of them is I want to create a certain person in the world to inhabit. So I want to be such and such. And the other is I want to delete a certain person from reality, namely myself. So both of these are self-centered desires. And that's why both of them are ultimately doomed to failure, and also why both of them are ultimately painful. So one of the things that we're cultivating through Buddhist practice is a complete acceptance that absolutely everything has its place in samsara, including every single state of being. It all has its place in samsara, and we don't want to identify with any of it, because all of it is suffering, all of it is dukkha, all of it's painful. So we don't want to identify with any of it, but at the same time, we recognize that it has its place and it cannot be deleted. And also that none of it is personal. None of this is personal. And if we stop taking it personally, then it won't matter to us whether things become or not, because it's not me, it's not mine, it's not personal.
Bhante, I wonder if you remember, as I recall, Karuna had taken you up on the proposition of meditating. Okay, 4 hours every day. I don't know if she was the one doing it continuously or not, but at least meditating 4 hours every day. I wonder, I'm curious to know how things have gone for her.
We talked about it when she was here on Sunday, and apparently it went great.
Great.
And in fact, she's coming on Friday to stay at the monastery for a bit.
Sadhu, Bhante.
Yep. I'm actually really glad that somebody actually took me up on that.
Yeah.
It's always a surprise.
There was one other person
I did try doing half of it. I did 2.5.
2.5 hours?
Yeah,
That's still really good.
Yeah.
That's good, yeah.
It was unintentionally though, just adding up to sit.
Do it intentionally next time.
Wow, yeah.
Like sit down at 1 o'clock and don't get up until 5.
Yeah, this was yesterday actually.
Good. Yeah, if you can do 2.5 hours, then you can do 4 hours.
Awesome. as I recall, there's someone else who said that they were determining to do the 4 hours.
Mm.
I can't remember their name. I wonder if they could raise their hand in there, and if they're with us. Let us know how it went. If they did.
Okay.
Not as well. Wow, great.
There's a
Multiple
couple
people.
more questions here, so
Okay.
let's see what else there is. So Sud asks, what role does virtue play in making sure one ends the cycle of samsara? Are there different types of virtue? One that leads to higher worlds and another that leads to end of the cycle? Do you want to answer this?
Gosh, I didn't catch it all. Sorry, I was playing with the cat. I have a good excuse. Okay. What role does virtue play in making sure what ends the cycle of samsara? Okay. The different types of virtue. Yes. One that leads to higher worlds and another that leads to the end of the cycle. Okay. Great question. Yeah. Well, virtue is one of the key elements of the Noble Eightfold Path. One way of looking at the Noble Eightfold Path is it can be categorized. It can be divided into 3 categories. That's the Sila Kanda, the Samadhi Kanda, and the Panya Kanda. Sila Kanda being morality, and Samadhi being meditation, and Panya being wisdom. And so it plays. It's intrinsic to the Noble Eightfold Path. It's indispensable actually to attaining and awakening. Other different kinds of virtue. There's, in one sense, we have different lists of ethics. For example, we have the 5 precepts. We have the 10 courses of skillful and unskillful action. We have the path factor precepts. We have the 8 precepts, and then the 10 precepts of the novice monks, and then of course all the precepts for the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis as well. So the many different kinds of virtue from that point of view. There are other schemes of virtue talked about in the, I don't know how much of it is in the sutras and how much of it is in the commentaries. And I'm not really prepared to quite to talk about it. It's sort of like, I wonder, Bhante Sudasa, if you know what I'm referring to, if you could. Okay, something like sila due to restraint and sila due to maybe overcoming or suppression, or no. Okay, so maybe I'm making all this up. Sorry.
Oh, Sabasava Sutta. Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. With regard to the asavas, restraining the asavas or overcoming the asavas. Okay. Thank you.
Great. And Lisa says, I believe I heard you say Buddhists believe we are to escape the cycle of death, birth, and rebirth. What happens after that? What is the goal? Well, so normally when the Buddha was asked what happens to an awakened being after they pass away, normally the Buddha refused to answer. And he said that there's no use in speculating on this question, because he said, even if you speculate on this question for 100 years, you'll never get one step closer to the answer, and you'll have just wasted 100 years. But there is one or two places in the suttas where the Buddha gives a semi-answer, where he says that the concepts of existence and non-existence do not apply. So it's using concepts which aren't relevant. And he gives the simile of a candle flame. So if you blow out a candle and then somebody asks, well, which direction did the candle go? Or which direction did the candle flame go? Then you're like, well, that question doesn't make any sense. So he says, in the same way, people say, does an awakened being exist or not exist after death? And the Buddha says, well, the question just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't apply. It's not relevant. What he does say is that he says it's the highest form of happiness. So while it's difficult to describe it in detail, what he does simply say is, he says, Nibbanang paramang sukham. It's the highest form of happiness. And it's a state in which there is no delusion. There's no suffering. And it's the highest form of happiness.
Let me ask, Bhante, is there also there's the aspect of being liberated from the cycle of birth and death? Mm-hmm. Is there also a sense that when someone attains nibbana, that it is a liberation, like the heart is liberated? So there's an association of freedom with it, kind of. Yeah,
that's another way the Buddha describes awakening is as complete freedom, complete liberation. Yeah. And Tiano says, belief in spiritual beings. I think this was how they were defining atheism. So in that case, Buddhism is definitely not atheistic. We most certainly do believe in spiritual beings. We just believe that they're mortal. And Santa Celesta Moye says, what if I want to live my life by following the Buddha's teachings, but I still want to be reincarnated again? Then I would say that you're exactly the same as 99% of Buddhists. Okay, next question. Yeah, the Buddha taught the path to the complete cessation of suffering, the path to complete awakening, but most Buddhists are actually practicing the path to a nicer rebirth, which is okay. The Buddha also said that he also teaches that path. It's just that it's inferior because it's unreliable and uncertain and temporary. But he also taught how to do that if that's what you want. And Sud says, what role does loving kindness play in ending the cycle of rebirth? Well, since Tan Wade has a lot more loving kindness than I do, I think he's the right one to answer this question.
I don't know if that's really true. Let's see. Well, the loving kindness is directly related to overcoming or displacing aversion from the mind. As one of the basic kilesas, we can use when we experience aversion, we can use loving kindness to overcome aversion. And if we're able to displace aversion, then with this kind of relative clarity of mind, we can apply ourselves to the 4 foundations of mindfulness practice, and that would be right on the Noble Eightfold Path. So the path, the Noble Eightfold Path is one path and has very specific factors. But sometimes getting onto that very kind of a specific description of a path, we can go by way of some other methodologies. For example, using loving kindness to overcome aversion, or using the recollection of the Buddha, for example, to give the heart inspiration and help it come together into samadhi, and then go on to 4 foundations of mindfulness practice on the Noble Eightfold Path. So there you go.
Great. And that's the last question online. Are there any questions from the monastery residents? Anybody have anything they want to ask about on this topic?
Samsara.
No? Yes? Go ahead.
I think you mentioned when the world ends, like if there's beings who can't be reborn in natural being, but either like in the hell realm or the heaven realm, they can get confusing. But I kind of like still have a question, like what happens to the beings that don't really belong in the hell or heaven realm when the universe ends?
So the problem here is normally that we're thinking in too small a scale. So one quote that I found really useful is from the current Paok Sayadaw, who he said, we all have enough good karma to be born in heaven, and we all have enough bad karma to be born in hell. Over the course of countless lifetimes, we've done everything horrible that you can imagine and everything wonderful that you can imagine. We've done it all at one point or another. So his point was that we all have a big stockpile of good karma and a big stockpile of bad karma. It's just a matter of when and how it expresses itself. So I think that was his way of handling this question. I have to say this is a concept which I think it only appears in one sutta.
There's a couple where it comes up.
It's in the Aganya Sutta for sure.
Yeah, there's a couple where it's mentioned in passing.
Okay.
But
anyway, it's something I've always found a little bit peculiar, but not too far of a reach. Because again, just thinking of the sheer quantity of good and bad karma that we've made, it's pretty likely that we all have some lurking karma good enough to be born in the heaven realm and some bad enough to be born in a hell realm.
aside from the Seven Sons Sutta and Buddha 779,
Uh-huh.
there's also in the Book of Fours, it's talking about, so one, either the noble one's discipline, and just an outsider, they develop the four Brahma Viharas. And so they go to the Brahma world for 1 aeon, 2, 4, or 500. But when that good karma is exhausted, they go to hell and around the sphere of 50 spirits.
Mm.
When the good karma is exhausted, and what we have left is like bad karma.
It's really nice to have like living sutta encyclopedias on hand. Yeah, it's really helpful.
I have a question to add on to that.
Yeah.
So I understand what you said now, but when the universe ends, does that mean all humans are already dead at that point? Like,
Yeah, definitely.
So
Yeah.
that means that like one state, there's everyone that's going to be either in hell or heaven.
I think you're overthinking this.
Okay.
Like, don't worry about it.
It's a long time from now.
Yeah. So right now you have a human body and you have access to Buddhism. So right now just focus on cultivating the conditions for awakening. And ideally, then you'll already have attained awakening by the next time humanity goes extinct. And then you won't have to worry about these things.
Thank you.
I had one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you familiar with the five? It refers to the, as I understand, there are 5 definitions for Mara. If I recollect correctly, one is death, Mara, Kilesa Mara, Kanda Mara, and then Mara Deva Puta. What's the 5th one? I don't remember, but my question refers to Deva Mara Puta. Many people say, no, woo-woo. But there's one sutta.
No, he's real and he's a jerk and he might come and hassle you once in a while.
Right, I like to hear that.
Yeah.
But there are 2 suttas that are interesting. One is in the Book of 8, right around 850. Oh, bhikkhus, I remember approaching these 8 assemblies, Brahmins, Catholics, householders, ascetics. There was a 4-day king. How the king today was an assembly of Maras and an assembly of Brahmins. I appeared dressed like them. I spoke like them. I called them the Dhamma. They didn't know who I was. And then I left and I said, who is that? And then the other little Buddha says, the royal proclamation to the foremost. And the foremost of those with bodies and prophet, Lord of the souls. The foremost of those who enjoy sensual pleasure, the king on Dhamma. The foremost of those who exercise authority is Mara, the evil one in this world with its devas, Maras, and Brahmas in this world with ascetics and Brahmins, devas, and humans. The foremost is the Tathagata.
Yeah, so technically speaking, Mara is a classification of devas. So there's not just one Mara, there's actually many of them. There's several suttas which talk about Mara in the plural, saying that there are many Maras. So normally when we talk about Mara, we're talking about Lord Mara. We're talking about the big boss who comes in and hassles Buddhists every now and then. And traditionally he's said to be the Lord of the Parinima Devasavati Deva. Yeah. So maybe that's where the other Maras also live. I don't know. I'm not sure. The sutta goes into detail on that. Yeah, it's a categorization of trickster devas, deceiver devas. So devas that delight in increasing people's defilements and delusions, which is why they're kind of the nemesis of Buddhist practitioners. Yeah.
It's refreshing to hear that you don't think that's like woo-woo. A lot of Westerners.
I mean, of course it's woo-woo, but it's also completely true. And just because something's woo-woo doesn't mean it's false. The word woo-woo actually comes from Chinese. It just means magical. So it's actually one of the few loan words from Chinese that we have in English. Yeah. Okay. And Sud says, is it better to aim for Brahma world, since it would probably be easier to practice there since you have eons of time to end samsara? No, it is not better to aim for Brahma worlds. So yes, you live a very long life, but it's a very long life of wasting time. So this actually also goes for all the heaven realms. If you want to be any kind of deva, you actually want to aim for one of the low deva realms. Definitely not for the high deva realms, and absolutely not for the Brahma worlds. The problem with the high deva realms is that they're just hanging out and blissed out because they have no suffering and their life feels great and it feels like there's no problems. So they just wind up wasting lots of time. So they have lots of time, but they just waste lots of time and then they die without having made one step in the direction of awakening. So this is why it's important to practice as humans, because humans are said to have the optimal mixture of pleasure and pain. We have enough pleasure that we're not just wallowing in misery all the time, but we have enough pain that we're motivated to practice spirituality. Now, the problem with the Deva worlds is that there's too much pleasure and no pain. So they just like hang around having a great time until eventually they die, and 10,000 years just went by without making any progress on the path. So no, it's not good to aim for the Brahma worlds. It's just another dead end in samsara. And Sud says, how does one attain to the Brahma worlds? Well, you're not going to try, so I won't tell you. And Sud says, if one practices diligently and follows the Eightfold Path with fidelity, did the Buddha say what might be the case for him at the end of his life if he has no attainments?
Oh,
Someone who's practicing the Eightfold Path faithfully but doesn't have any noble attainments, what's going to happen?
So I don't know, but there's a statement in the suttas that if a monastic dies in the robes, this is more specific than any person practicing diligently. If a monastic dies in the robes and loves the Buddha, then he is destined for the heaven realms.
Oh, cute. Okay.
It's the closest reference I can think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, at a bare minimum, you'll have really good karma, and also you'll have a strong affinity with Buddhism, which means you're much more likely to have contact with Buddhism in your future lives. So you're not doomed, but you're not safe either. But you'll have a good leg up for your next life. And Kumu asks, is it the Attika Nagara Sutta that describes attaining Nibbana via the Brahmaviharas by developing it fully and then changing it to an insight meditation due to impermanence nature of even those states? Yes, that's the Attika Nagara Sutta. You just described it very nicely. It's actually one of my favorite suttas in the Pali Canon. It's quite delightful. He also mentions practicing the jhanas and then cultivating the perception of impermanence, and also practicing the first 3 of the 4 formless attainments for a total of 11. Yeah, good sutta. Yeah, that's the last of the questions. Anything else?
Yeah, I wonder if I could bring up something.
Go ahead.
As one of last week, one of our viewers had written a question about what is Abhayatam.
Ah, yeah.
Right. And so we answered, and that viewer came in over the weekend and was saying that actually she was using the term according to Sinhalese usage, and there they use it. She was saying, this was her report, that they use it to refer to releasing living beings who are going to be killed or slaughtered.
Oh, interesting.
And
okay.
So different. It's probably used differently in different places and so on. But,
yeah, interesting. I'd also heard that in Thailand, it has the meaning of forgiving someone.
Okay.
Which also is not how it's used in the suttas, but is fair enough. It's still a good practice. And Sud asks, does the Buddha ever say how rigorously one should try to end samsara? Yes, he does. He says, imagine that your hat or your hair was on fire. And the Buddha says, if your hat or your hair was on fire, how vigorously would you try to extinguish that fire? So that, he says, is how rigorously one should practice to attain awakening. It's just as if you were trying to extinguish your burning hair. And got a question? No?
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I think we're coming to the end of our session this evening. So I appreciate all of your questions and comments and contributions. It's always delightful to have these Dhamma discussions. So I think we can go ahead and conclude at this time.
Handamayang Dhammagadhaya Sadhukaram Dadamase.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami. Great, and we'll see you all tomorrow.